The trip had been Claire's idea. I remember the way her eyes lit up when she found the listing for the bed and breakfast online, her fingers tapping excitedly at the screen of her phone. She turned it to show me, the glow from the screen reflecting on her face as she said, "Look, they do a whole cozy Halloween theme. It'll be perfect." I had to admit, the pictures did look charming. Warm lights spilling through the windows, pumpkins lining the porch, and the promise of a quiet escape from the rest of the world. I wasn't usually one for holiday-themed getaways, but something about the way Claire looked at me, her eyes hopeful and her smile soft, made it impossible to say no. So we booked it, just one night at the end of October, when the air was cold enough to see your breath and the trees stood bare against a gray sky. It was supposed to be an escape from everything, from the noise of the city, from our endless to-do lists, from the stress that seemed to cling to our lives like a shadow. We wanted something different, something that would let us pretend, even for just a night, that the world was simpler and quieter. I could picture it in my head, the two of us wrapped in blankets, sipping hot cider, surrounded by the glow of candles and the comforting scent of old wood and spices. The morning of our trip, we packed light, just a small duffel bag each, with sweaters and scarves and snacks for the road. As we drove, the city slowly faded behind us, replaced by rolling fields and narrow roads lined with trees. The sky seemed to hang low, a ceiling of pale clouds that made everything feel muted and distant. It felt like we were slipping away from the world, into a place where time moved differently. Claire was humming along to the music, some old folk song she had found on a playlist called Haunted Hearth. She had a knack for finding those sorts of things, the little details that made everything feel like a story. I reached over, giving her hand a squeeze, and she smiled at me, her eyes bright even in the dim light of the overcast day. I wanted to make this special for her. I wanted it to be the kind of memory that we could hold on to long after Halloween had passed and the rest of the world came rushing back in. We pulled up to the bed and breakfast just as the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, the sky streaked with the last hints of orange and pink. The house was old, Victorian maybe, with narrow windows and a wide porch that wrapped around the front. There were jack-o'-lanterns carved with crooked smiles lining the steps, their candlelight flickering against the growing dark. "This is going to be great," Claire said, her voice filled with a kind of childlike excitement that made me smile. I nodded, hoping she was right. The front door opened before we even reached it, the wooden planks creaking under our feet as we stepped onto the porch. A woman stood in the doorway, her face framed by the dim glow of the hallway behind her. She smiled warmly, her eyes crinkling at the corners. I felt Claire's hand slip into mine, and I squeezed it, feeling the excitement radiating from her. "Welcome," the woman said, her voice soft. "We're so glad you could join us." She stepped aside, motioning for us to come in, and I hesitated just for a moment. Claire tugged at my hand, and I followed her inside, the door closing behind us with a heavy thud that echoed through the house. It was cozy, just like the pictures had shown. Warm light from the lamps, wooden floors that creaked with every step, and the faint scent of cinnamon. Claire let out a contented sigh, her eyes taking in every detail. The host smiled at us again, her voice warm as she spoke. "We have a few other guests staying with us tonight, but it's a quiet group. You're welcome to join them in the sitting room if you'd like, or just relax in your room. There's hot cider in the kitchen, and if you need anything, just let me know." She led us down the hallway, her steps steady on the creaking floorboards. The house seemed to have a timeless quality to it, as if it had seen countless guests come and go. She paused at a door near the end of the hallway and turned to us with another smile. "Here we are," she said, opening the door to reveal a cozy room, complete with a 4-poster bed and a window that looked out onto the garden. "I hope you enjoy your stay." Claire and I exchanged a quick look, her eyes wide with excitement. As soon as the host left us to settle in, Claire dropped our bags on the bed and turned to me, her grin almost infectious. "This place is perfect," she said, her voice barely a whisper, as if she didn't want to disturb the calm. I nodded, feeling the same buzz of excitement. We were finally here. "Want to check out that hot cider?" I asked, and Claire's face lit up even more. "Absolutely," she replied. We left our bags where they were and headed down the hallway, the wooden floor creaking beneath our feet. The house felt alive, every sound echoing gently in the quiet. As we entered the kitchen, the scent of spices grew stronger. A large pot sat on the stove, steam rising from it, and the host had left a stack of mismatched mugs on the counter beside it. Claire reached for a mug, her eyes darting around the kitchen, taking in the old wooden cabinets and the shelves lined with jars of herbs and spices. "This feels like a movie set," she said, her voice full of wonder. I couldn't help but agree. It was like we'd stepped into a different world, one where everything moved a little slower and life felt a little more magical. I poured us each a mug of cider, the warmth of it seeping into my hands. "To a perfect getaway," I said, raising my mug. Claire clinked hers against mine, her smile softening. "To us," she replied. Everything felt exactly right. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 8 p.m. "What do you say we check out the sitting room?" I asked, and Claire nodded eagerly, her curiosity as strong as mine. We made our way down the hallway, following the soft murmur of voices until we found the sitting room. A few other guests were scattered around, a couple by the fireplace, an older man reading a book in the corner, and a young woman who looked up and gave us a quick smile. The room was dimly lit, the flickering light from the fireplace casting dancing shadows across the walls. There was something about the atmosphere that felt a little off. The older man looked up briefly, his eyes lingering on us for a moment longer than felt comfortable before returning to his book. Claire didn't seem to notice, her attention drawn to the decorations, old portraits hanging on the walls, and an antique clock ticking steadily on the mantel. "This is so quaint," she whispered to me, her eyes wide. I nodded, but there was a feeling gnawing at the back of my mind, a sense that something about this room, or maybe the people in it, didn't quite fit. After lingering for a few minutes, we decided to take a seat on an empty love seat near the fireplace. I tried to relax, listening to the crackling of the fire and Claire's excited whispers about the decorations, but my attention kept drifting to the other guests. The couple by the fireplace seemed to be murmuring to each other, but their words were too low for me to catch. The older man occasionally glanced up at us, his gaze unsettling. Eventually, we decided to explore a bit more, and as we left the sitting room, we wandered into one of the long hallways. It was there that we came across an elderly couple standing by one of the doors, looking lost. The man was whispering something to the woman, his brow furrowed, and when they noticed us, they both turned, their eyes wide with something that looked almost like fear. "Are you all right?" I asked, stepping closer. The woman shook her head slowly, her gaze darting around the hallway. "We've been here for years," she said, her voice trembling. "The house, it never lets go." I blinked, unsure if I had heard her correctly. The man nodded in agreement, his eyes hollow. "You should leave," he added, his voice barely a whisper, "before it's too late." I felt a chill run down my spine, and I glanced at Claire, who looked just as confused as I felt. "Did you hear that?" Claire whispered, her brow furrowing. "What do they mean, the house never lets go?" I shook my head, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't know. Maybe they're just confused. Let's not jump to conclusions." Claire nodded slowly, but I could see the unease in her eyes. We both turned back to see the elderly couple turning the corner at the end of the hallway, disappearing from sight. The hallway seemed empty now, but there was still a lingering coldness in the air. Claire and I walked in silence, exchanging uneasy glances as we made our way back towards our room. "That was strange," I said. Claire nodded. "Yeah," she said, her voice hesitant. "I mean, they looked genuinely scared. Maybe they were just confused or tired." She sighed. "Maybe we just need to relax, get some rest." I nodded, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling still gnawing at me. Yeah, let's just get back to the room. Once we were back in the room, Claire let out a long breath, dropping down onto the bed. Okay, let's just relax, she said, as if willing the strangeness of the evening away. I nodded, sitting down beside her and wrapping my arm around her shoulders. For a moment, we just sat there, letting the warmth of the room ease our nerves. As I looked towards the window, I noticed something odd. The garden outside looked different, darker, almost as if it had changed entirely. Instead of the soft glow of the garden lights, there were now dense, dark woods beyond the glass, the kind that seemed to swallow the light. I blinked, thinking it was just my imagination. When I looked again, the garden had returned, just as we had seen it earlier. Hey Claire, I said, my voice unsure. Did you notice the view from the window? Claire glanced over, frowning slightly. No. Why? I shook my head. Maybe it's nothing. It just looked different for a second. I tried to laugh it off, but the unease was still there, gnawing at me. We decided to settle into bed, hoping that some rest would help shake off the eerie feeling that seemed to linger in the room. Claire pulled the blanket over herself and leaned back against the pillows, letting out a deep breath. I tried to do the same, but the strangeness of the evening weighed heavily on my mind. After a few moments, Claire shifted beside me. I think I need to go to the bathroom, she said. I nodded, watching as she got up and made her way across the room. I stayed in bed, trying to let my eyes rest, but they kept drifting back to the window. Suddenly, Claire's scream pierced the silence, jolting me upright. My heart pounded in my chest as I jumped out of bed and rushed to the bathroom door. Claire burst out of the bathroom, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. What happened? I asked, grabbing her shoulders, trying to steady her. She was trembling, her breath coming in short gasps. There was someone in the mirror, she stammered, her voice shaking. A woman. She was standing right behind me, and she reached for me. The lights went out, and I felt something touch my neck. Claire's hand went to her shoulder, and I noticed a dark bruise forming, shaped like long, slender fingers. A cold dread settled in my stomach, and I pulled her close. It's okay, I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. We're going to be okay. Once we were back, Claire let out a long breath, dropping down onto the mattress. For a moment, we just sat there, letting the warmth of the room ease our nerves. A few minutes later, just as we managed to find a semblance of calm, I looked towards the window again and felt my stomach drop. The windows were gone. Where there had once been glass, there was now just a blank wall, as if the windows had never existed. My pulse quickened as I reached out, my fingers brushing against the wall, feeling a cold, damp surface, almost like stone. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and then I heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from the other side of the wall. Claire, I called, my voice trembling. Come here. She walked over, her eyes widening as she saw the blank wall where the window had been. What the... She started, but her words trailed off as the scratching grew louder, more insistent. We both stood there, frozen, the cold seeping through the wall and into our bones. Claire shivered, her eyes wide with fear. What is happening here? This isn't normal, she whispered, her voice cracking. I swallowed hard, trying to think of something, anything, that would make sense of what was happening. There was something fundamentally wrong about this place. Something we couldn't ignore. We should leave, Claire said, her voice urgent. I don't care if it's the middle of the night. We need to get out of here. I nodded, the weight of her words pressing on me. Let's grab our stuff, I said. We're getting out of here. We moved quickly, the urgency of our situation forcing us to focus. I grabbed our bags and handed Claire her coat. Ready? I asked, my voice tense. Claire nodded, her face pale. Let's go, she whispered, and we made our way towards the door, our hearts pounding, the air thick with dread. As we left the room, we rushed towards the main lobby, our footsteps echoing through the narrow hallway. The front door stood just ahead, a beacon of escape, but when we reached it and tried to open it, the door wouldn't budge. I pulled harder, my hands trembling, but it was as if the door was fused to the frame. Why won't it open? Claire's voice was laced with panic, her eyes wide as she tried to help. We tugged and pushed, but the door remained unmoving, the cold brass of the handle almost mocking us. Suddenly we heard footsteps behind us. I turned, my heart pounding, and saw the host standing there. Her smile was still in place, but it seemed different now, more unsettling, her eyes darker, almost hollow. She held an old-fashioned key in her hand, extending it towards us. "If you want to leave, follow the rules," she whispered, her voice almost a hiss. I reached out, taking the key, the metal cold against my skin. "What rules?" Claire asked, her voice trembling. The host didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked away, her figure disappearing around the corner before we could say another word. We stood there for a moment, the key heavy in my hand. "What does she mean, the rules?" I muttered, frustration and fear bubbling inside me. I tried the key on the front door, but it didn't fit. We moved through the lobby, trying other doors, but none of them matched the key. "This can't be happening," Claire said, her voice breaking. "We need to find a way out," I said. Claire nodded, her face pale, her eyes filled with fear. We glanced around the dimly lit lobby, our breaths still shaky. My eyes landed on a small table near the wall, a piece of paper resting on top. I stepped closer, Claire following behind, and picked up the note. The handwriting was elegant, almost old-fashioned, and the words sent a chill down my spine. "Use the key to unlock the room where the grandfather clock chimes. You must do this before the 12th chime or the door will vanish." "What the hell?" Claire whispered, her eyes scanning the note over my shoulder. "The grandfather clock?" I nodded, my pulse quickening. "There was a clock in the sitting room. We have to find it, and fast." Claire swallowed, fear evident in her eyes. "Before the 12th chime, that should be at midnight. What time is it now?" I glanced at the large clock on the wall. It was nearly midnight. "We don't have much time, come on," I said, grabbing her hand. We hurried back towards the sitting room, our footsteps echoing through the empty halls, the sense of urgency pressing heavily on us. As we made our way towards the sitting room, the house felt eerily empty. The murmurs and voices we'd heard earlier had vanished, leaving behind an unsettling silence. No other guests, no distant sounds, just the echo of our footsteps in the dim hallway. We reached the sitting room, and I quickly scanned for the grandfather clock. It stood in the corner. I exhaled, feeling a momentary sense of relief. But as we approached, the chimes began, soft and distant, not from the clock in front of us, but somewhere else, deeper in the house. My heart sank. "It's not this one," I said, the realization washing over me like an icy wave. Claire's eyes widened. "Where is it coming from?" I strained my ears, and the chimes grew louder, coming from the direction of the lobby and the hallway beyond. "We have to move, now," I said, grabbing her hand again. The clock had already chimed 3 times, and each strike seemed to reverberate through the walls, urging us forward. We rushed out of the sitting room, the sound of our frantic footsteps mixing with the growing chimes. 4, 5, 6. The clock was relentless, counting down to something we didn't want to face. The hallway twisted in front of us, the sound getting louder with every turn we took. 7, 8. Claire's breathing was ragged, fear etched across her face. "Where is it?" she gasped, her voice barely audible over the echoing chimes. 9, 10. I spotted a door at the far end of the hallway. The chimes seemed to be coming from beyond it. "There!" I shouted, pulling Claire along as we sprinted towards it. 11. We reached the door, and I fumbled with the key, my hands trembling. I could feel the final chime building, the air thick with tension. I jammed the key into the lock, twisting it just as the 12th chime began to echo through the house. The door swung open, and we stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind us. The sound of the final chime faded, leaving us in silence once more. I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath, my heart racing as I looked at Claire. Her eyes were wide, and her face was pale, but she was here, safe, with me. "We made it," I whispered, though I wasn't sure what that meant or what lay ahead of us. The room was dark, the only light coming from a single candle flickering on a table in the corner. Whatever was happening, we had followed the first rule. As we looked around the room more closely, I spotted something behind the flickering candlelight, a grandfather clock standing against the far wall. Its ornate wooden door had a small glass panel, and through it, I could see a folded note tucked inside. My stomach churned, a mix of dread and curiosity swirling inside me. Claire and I exchanged a glance, and I slowly approached the clock, the wood creaking beneath my feet. With trembling hands, I opened the clock door and pulled out the note, the paper feeling brittle and cold to the touch. I unfolded it, and the words written on it sent another chill down my spine. "There is a jack-o'-lantern in the basement. You must guide it to the top floor without letting it go out." I read the note aloud, my voice barely steady. Claire's eyes widened, her face growing even paler. "The basement," she whispered, her voice quivering. "I don't like this, not one bit." I nodded, my own fear mirroring hers. "I know," I said softly, reaching for her hand. "But I think we have to do this." She swallowed hard, her gaze darting towards the door. I took a deep breath, squeezing her hand. "Okay, let's find the basement." We left the room, slowly making our way through the hallway towards the lobby. The house felt colder now, an oppressive silence pressing down on us. The lobby loomed ahead, and as we stepped into the open space, I felt my heart skip a beat. Standing completely still in the center of the lobby was a young man in a uniform. He looked like one of the staff members, like a butler. Claire and I froze, exchanging a glance. He was just standing there, his posture unnaturally stiff, his face turned away from us. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky, echoing slightly in the empty hall. The man turned slowly, his head pivoting as if on a hinge. His face was blank, his eyes empty and lifeless. A shiver ran down my spine, and I felt Claire tighten her grip on my hand. The young man raised a hand, pointing upwards toward the ceiling. We both looked up, and a chill washed over me. Above us, we could hear heavy, slow footsteps, moving across the ceiling, each thud echoing through the lobby. I swallowed hard, dread pooling in my stomach. That's when it hit me. Those footsteps were coming from the top floor, the same floor where we needed to take the jack-o'-lantern. When we looked back at the man, he was gone. Nothing remained but his uniform, crumpled on the floor as if he'd simply melted away. Claire let out a small gasp, her eyes wide with fear. What is happening here?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I shook my head, my throat dry. "I don't know, but we need to keep moving," I said, pulling her closer. We glanced around, and that's when we saw it. A door off to the side of the lobby that looked like it could lead to the basement. Solid wood with a small iron handle. I took a deep breath, exchanging a quick look with Claire before reaching out to open the door. The hinges groaned as the door swung inward, revealing a dark wooden stairway leading down. A flickering light, barely visible, came from somewhere deep in the basement. With no light source of our own, we hesitated. The darkness seemed impenetrable, and every instinct told me to turn back, but we had no choice. I squeezed Claire's hand, and together we slowly made our way down, each step echoing softly in the silence. The air grew colder as we descended, and the smell of damp earth and mildew grew stronger. The flickering light grew brighter as we reached the bottom. I scanned the room, my heart pounding, until I saw the old jack-o'-lantern sitting on the ground, its carved face barely illuminated by the candle inside. I exhaled shakily and moved towards it. "Okay, Claire, now let's just get out of here," I said, reaching for the lantern. Silence. I turned, my eyes widening as I realized there was no response. "Claire?" I repeated, my voice louder now, a tinge of panic creeping in. Nothing. My heart started to race, and I looked around the basement, the shadows playing tricks on my eyes. "Claire, where are you?" I called, my voice trembling. The silence stretched on. the flickering light casting shifting shapes around the room. My stomach twisted in fear. I spun around, searching, when I suddenly saw her emerging from the darkness, slowly approaching me. Relief surged through me, my body relaxing slightly. "Claire, you scared the hell out of me," I said, forcing a nervous laugh. "I couldn't find you." She didn't respond, just kept moving towards me, her face obscured by the darkness. Something felt wrong. I raised the lantern, letting its glow fall across her face. The tension drained from me for a moment as I saw her familiar features, the soft curve of her lips, her eyes glistening in the faint light. Just my Claire. Then I heard it, a faint call, my name, drifting through the silence from somewhere near the staircase. I stiffened, keeping my eyes on her, still standing right in front of me. "Claire?" I whispered, my throat tight. I raised the lantern higher. "Did you hear that?" Suddenly, the flame flickered violently, plunging the room in and out of darkness. In the fleeting moments of light, I saw her face twist, the skin turning ashen, her eyes sinking into dark pits, her lips pulled back into a grotesque grin, revealing thin, elongated teeth. My breath caught in my throat as the light sputtered again, and the figure moved closer, her face a mask of something inhuman. My name echoed again, louder now, cutting through the darkness. I turned towards the staircase, my eyes catching sight of Claire, halfway up the stairs, her eyes wide with fear. "Let's go!" she shouted, her voice urgent. My heart pounded in my chest, and without another thought I turned to run, but the figure lunged at me, its cold, claw-like hand wrapping around my wrist. The grip was ice cold, and a sharp pain shot up my arm. I struggled, yanking myself free, and stumbled backward, almost dropping the lantern. Panic surged through me as I turned and rushed towards Claire, the light trembling in my hand. As I moved, I could feel the presence behind me. The air was filled with a low, guttural moaning, a chilling sound that seemed to reverberate from the figure behind me. I could hear Claire calling me from above, her voice a lifeline amidst the fear that clawed at me. I pushed myself harder, my feet pounding on the steps as I ascended, the basement's dark presence pressing in on my back. Finally, I stumbled out of the basement, Claire grabbing my arm to steady me as we slammed the door shut behind us. For a moment, silence fell, until we heard the faint sound of cries echoing from the basement below, growing fainter as if the house itself was swallowing them whole. We exchanged a look, the terror still evident in Claire's eyes. "We need to take this to the top floor," I said, my voice trembling. She nodded, her gaze shifting towards the staircase that led upwards, where the heavy footsteps had echoed before. With the jack-o'-lantern in hand, we started to climb. Each step seemed heavier than the last, the weight of the house's presence pressing down on us as we ascended, the dread growing with every creak of the old wooden stairs. As we reached the top floor, the darkness was nearly complete, the only light coming from the flickering jack-o'-lantern in my hand. Its dim glow cast shifting shadows on the walls, making the hallway feel endless. Slowly, as my eyes adjusted, I realized we weren't alone. Ghostly figures emerged from the darkness, their hollow eyes fixed on us. They were scattered across the hallway, standing still, staring. Figures that looked like the other guests we'd encountered earlier, and many more besides. Their eyes were empty and unfeeling, their forms barely distinguishable in the flickering light. The atmosphere was thick with tension as the figures silently parted, creating a path for us. Their eyes never left us, their gazes following our every move. I felt Claire's hand tighten in mine, her breath hitching. One of the figures stepped forward, and I recognized him. It was the old man we had seen earlier in the sitting room. He raised a trembling hand, pointing first to the jack-o'-lantern, then towards a large window at the end of the hall. His gestures were slow and deliberate, as if urging us to take the jack-o'-lantern to the window. I swallowed hard, understanding that whatever we had to do, we needed to do it quickly. The jack-o'-lantern's light flickered, and as it did, the ghosts seemed to inch closer, their presence becoming more oppressive. A chill washed over me. We had to keep moving. We started down the hallway, and with each flicker of the jack-o'-lantern, I noticed something horrifying. Claire's features were changing. Her eyes became vacant, her face blurring slightly, almost as if she was slowly becoming part of the spectral crowd around us. My heart pounded as I looked at her, fear rising inside me. Her movements grew stiffer, her skin colder. I tightened my grip on her hand, desperate to keep her with me. "Claire, stay with me," I whispered, my voice trembling. She didn't respond, her gaze distant, her expression almost blank. The jack-o'-lantern flickered again, and Claire began to mutter softly. Her words were incoherent at first, but then I heard her whisper, "It's calling me. I can't leave." A shiver ran down my spine. The old man gestured towards the window one last time, before fading back into the group of ghostly figures. I noticed a note pinned to the window ledge, written in the same old-fashioned script as the previous one. To escape, light must touch the outside. We needed to hold the jack-o'-lantern up to the window to let its light shine outside. It was our only hope. "Claire, we have to do this," I said, my voice urgent. Her eyes were losing their focus, the warmth in her face fading. I pulled her towards the window, the ghosts growing more restless with every flicker of the lantern. As we reached the window, I held the jack-o'-lantern high, trying to angle it so that its light spilled out into the darkness beyond. The light flickered again, and Claire let out a strangled cry, her eyes wide as if she was waking from a nightmare. The ghosts recoiled, their forms dissolving in the growing light. A sudden, deafening noise, a deep rumble, shook the floor beneath us. I pulled Claire closer, my heart pounding, praying that this was enough to break the house's hold over her. Finally, the light touched the outside, and the room plunged into silence. The ghosts were gone, and Claire collapsed into my arms, weak but seemingly herself. I held her tightly, relief washing over me, though I could still feel the weight of what had happened. Claire looked at me, her eyes weary, and I knew we had to leave. We rushed towards the lobby, our footsteps echoing off the walls. But as we moved through the house, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. Claire would pause now and then, her gaze drifting towards shadows or corners, a distant smile playing on her lips, as if something was still whispering to her. We reached the front door, and this time it opened without resistance. Just as we were about to step outside, I heard a voice behind us, the host, her tone dripping with eerie calmness. "The final rule is only one can leave. If you both try to leave, the house will claim the soul of one at random." My heart stopped, and I felt Claire's grip on my hand tighten. Panic surged through me as I realized what that meant. Without hesitation, I turned to Claire, my heart breaking, and pushed her through the doorway, the force of it making her stumble out into the cold air. The door slammed shut behind her, the echo reverberating through the empty house. I was plunged into darkness, the sudden silence deafening. I fell to my knees, the weight of my decision crashing down on me. The whispers began, soft, chilling murmurs from the ghostly figures that surrounded me, their presence growing closer, their voices echoing in the blackness. I didn't know if I would ever escape, if I could ever be free of this place, but I knew one thing: Claire was safe, and that was enough. Even if it meant I would be lost forever, I had saved her. And in that moment, amidst the darkness and the whispers, that was the only comfort I had left. The darkness may have claimed me, but at least she will walk in the light.